Hey everyone, welcome to another new episode of Casually Curious. This one's going to be another installment of the Distillation series that we started not too long ago. And I'm going to be picking up in a new section from the Essential Kierkegaard. I read something from him last episode and I am enjoying it way too much. And it just so happens that the passage I have to read today is one that I thought more likely than not a good proportion of the target audience for something like Casually Curious might identify with this phenomenon. And it's he's talking about the kind of person who might ask the big questions and also find him or herself alone amongst their peers in asking those kinds of more fundamental questions out of the just out of the ordinary social Overton window of polite discussion, I guess, or something like that, something along those lines. All right, so I'm going to pull it up. I'm also trying out this new breakdown of I'm recording the screen so it can be sort of like a real-time reading along, which I think hopefully will be cool if I can get the editing to work out. All right, so, quote, Kierkegaard. I have had little to win or to lose in association with the ordinary run of men, partly because what they did, so-called practical life, does not interest me much, partly because their coldness and indifference to the spiritual and deeper currents in man alienate me even more from them. With few exceptions, my companions have had no special influence upon me. A life that has not arrived at clarity about itself must necessarily exhibit an uneven side surface. Confronted by certain facts and their apparent disharmony, they simply halted there, for they did not have the sufficient interest in me to seek a resolution in a higher harmony or to recognize the necessity of it. Their opinion of me was always one-sided, and I have vacillated between putting too much or too little weight on what they said. I have now withdrawn from their influence and the potential variations of my life's compass resulting from it. Thus, I am again standing at the point where I must begin again in another way. I shall now calmly attempt to look at myself and begin to initiate inner action, for only thus will I be able, like a child calling itself I in its first consciously undertaken act, be able to call myself I in a profounder sense. So there is a shit ton of dense and rich, interesting things just in this. So I'll just quickly sort of run through my favorite lines. The so-called practical life that I think other people just sort of get almost pulled into the currents of practical life and the perhaps socially the social consensus of what it is that we should be valuing, which paths we should be taking, and it takes a sort of different type of person to become interested in things that don't map on to those currents that everyone else is just, they're just in it. And he's a bit harsh when he says, with few exceptions, my companions have had no special influence upon me. I guess it just depends on what sort of influence it is that you're valuing. And with Kierkegaard's sort of Christian and spiritual ideological underpinnings, I'm surprised that it seems to me that, friendship, even in those other, perhaps not so philosophical, but more experiential qualities would have a bunch of value. But I think he's talking more about the isolation that can come with, or the lack of special influence when it has to do specifically with those larger questions that that some people find themselves asking. So let me just keep going. I have vacillated between putting too much or too little weight on what they said. I have now withdrawn from their influence and the potential variations of my life's compass resulting from it. That really struck me, because vacillating between too much or too little weight on what others say about you, whoever you are, the person who is contemplating these, quote unquote, deeper philosophical issues. That's been really something to come to terms with that I've been going through. And I feel like, some people are better and at it. I know if anyone listens to, what is it? Very Bad Wizards podcast, like Tamler and I can't even think of the other guy's name, but they have such a great rapport that, I don't know if they ever went through this phase, this transition, but they're obviously, just like great guys who have a great friendship, and they don't allow the intensity of the subject matter to dampen their sense of humor. And that definitely took a little time for me. I remember just, there was a time when being amongst my friends in social situations that I previously was totally used to and acclimated to, all of a sudden, I couldn't participate without the fact that these were just human beings, talking about things that really, in the grand scheme of things, might not matter all too much. And there I was, just floored by the fact that human beings even get together in social circumstances in the first place, and like, whoa, what does that mean? And it was just sort of like philosophical ruminations gone wild. And that can be, I think, very isolating. I definitely sort of recently, after diving into philosophy more intensely than I have before, it can definitely, it gets more difficult to, pull yourself in and out of that state. But that's something you have to learn how to do. And that was my point with Tamler and the Very Bad Wizards, is that I feel like they have had some time to get accustomed to the sorts of habits, or, I feel like they just have a very good outlook, a disposition that, may or may not. I have a sense that maybe, they seem like deep thinkers. So, I'm sure they went through a stage like that. All right, hopefully that didn't take too long with my commentary. All right, so next section. Yeah, so he has to begin in another way. I shall now calmly attempt to look at myself and begin to initiate interaction, for only thus will I be able, like a child calling itself I in its first consciously undertaken act, be able to call myself I in a profounder sense. But that takes stamina, and it is not possible to harvest immediately what one has sown. That's a bitch. I will remember that philosopher's method of having his disciples keep silent for 3 years, and then I dare say it will come. Just as one does not begin a feast at sunrise but at sundown, just so in the spiritual world one must first work forward with some time before the sun really shines for us and rises in all its glory. For although it is true, as it says, that God lets his sun shine upon the good and the evil, and lets the rain fall on the just and the unjust, it is not so in the spiritual world. So let the die be cast. I am crossing the Rubicon. No doubt this road takes me into battle, but I will not renounce it. I like that line. It's something, it's something, it's almost like a spiritual or a, philosophical call to arms, like, if you're seriously considering this way of life, it's taking you into battle, and you're going to have to battle against, the currents of, the currents that our peers are maybe in the midst of, and you have to be able to fight to get out of that, but then also you have to have the skill set to go back into it, because that's where real connections are formed. And anyway, so that's too much. I haven't really thought any of that through. Okay, so next section. I will not lament the past. Why lament? I will work energetically and not waste time in regrets, like the person stuck in a bog and first calculating how far he has sunk without recognizing that during the time he spends on that, he is sinking still deeper. I will hurry along the path I have found and shout to everyone I meet. Do not look back as Lot's wife did, but remember that we are struggling up a hill. And the last section. Philosophy is perfectly right in saying that life must be understood backward. But then one forgets the other clause, that it must be lived forward. The more one thinks through this clause, the more one concludes that life in temporality never becomes properly understandable, simply because never at any time does one get perfect repose to take a stance backward. I feel like I could read that one small paragraph, and still be pulling out meaningful interpretations for the rest of my life. So I can't even comment on that. So this first section, I will not lament the past. Why lament? I will work energetically and not waste time in regrets, like the person stuck in a bog. Yeah, I love that analogy. And that sort of plays into, I think, what I was talking about, the sort of the problem of having a philosophical inclination, a disposition towards asking the big questions, is that if no one else is there to join you in talking about that sort of stuff, then you're on your own. You have to deal with contemplating that sort of thing, whether or not anyone else will take an interest with you and accompany you there. And that leads to you sort of creating an internal dialogue with yourself, a dialectic, or at least, the construction of you sort of go down different paths of entertaining these thoughts and so on. And that can get into a bog, that's you not going anywhere and asking why it is you haven't gone anywhere. And the asking is exactly the thing that is keeping you where you are. And that's the catch-22. And I certainly am feeling that recently. It's kind of cool to be recording this and know that this is me struggling up the hill right now, is recording this, and not looking backwards and hoping that just putting my thoughts out there, even if they're quite, rough and just, the number of times I sort of am saying something, sort of have an incomplete thought, train maybe doesn't connect to to the rest of the web or the structure that I'm trying to build up, a logical chain of events, it's very tempting to want to just start over. And believe me, I started this recording over many times, and that would be exactly the process of lamenting. And at the end of the day, I don't think it does me any good. I don't think it would do anyone really at all any good. And I think Kierkegaard really just hits the nail on the head when it comes to expounding these things that I deal with, at least I've experienced to a high degree. And I'm sure anyone out there who may find this and be listening, I have a feeling, judging by the rest of the content and me and Rob and the sort of stuff that we like to talk about, and I have a feeling that you've probably had somewhat of a similar experience. That's also part of the impetus to put my stuff out there, and hopefully, it's like the internet is such an incredible vast resource if you're into these sorts of things, but you can't, to just watch someone talk or listen to someone talking about something, or to only read isn't quite enough. It's also helpful to attempt to connect with others and interview people, and that's where the podcasting comes in handy. And it's a real opportunity to find a community of people that you can have sustained conversations. And I think even listening to a conversation is better in a way than what I'm doing right now, which is just talking to a camera, because you're hearing the back and forth. But I am attempting to. That's why I restarted the recording so many times, is because it's to really have the sense in the back of my head that I'm talking to whoever you happen to be on the other side of the camera, and that the camera is a person in front of me. That is so difficult. And I was going to mention that in the very beginning, but I tried, and then I restarted, and now here we are at the end of the video. So I'm sure there's no one watching now, so I can just keep going. But yeah, it is. That's a tough thing. That's going to take some practice, I think, to continuously remind myself that there's, to speak as if the audience, quote unquote, unfortunately that's the mistake, is the audience is that amorphous sort of thing that's hard to relate to or talk to. But if it's a person, if I could imagine myself interviewing someone who's going to, I don't know, who knows, like respond with a video back, and then it sort of gets you in the place of speaking to someone directly. So yeah, I'll throw this in at the very end. I don't know how directly related this is to the Kierkegaard anymore, but that's part of the opportunity with this, is for a little experimentation, a little innovation, to use a contemporary Silicon Valley term. I'm going to experiment with making the content more personal than I initially set out to. But because I find myself in this bog, like Kierkegaard is describing, I figured that the best way to get out of it would be to not lament, not to live life forward, to understand it by looking backward, but to live it forward. And that's the paradoxical insight that Kierkegaard puts so nicely in the last paragraph. So I hope you were able to follow with the live screen recording. So that'll be interesting, and hopefully this didn't turn out to be too long. All right, so I'm gonna sign off from here, and stay tuned for another episode that I don't know what it will be yet, but hopefully something interesting. All right, thanks. See you all later.